Okay, hello everyone. I'm gonna have you guys forgive me a little bit today because I'm just getting over a cold and a fairly bad one, so I'm just starting to be able to talk again. So, today I want to go over types of arguments. Not arguments like this that we see over here, where two people are just yelling at each other, but I want to talk about the classical type of arguments that there's really about 5 categories that we set up for classical arguments, and that's what we want to focus on for our papers. You'll be writing papers in one of these 5 styles. First, there's 2 major types of arguments, explicit and implicit. Explicit arguments state a controversial claim and the reasons with intent of persuading to a point of view. So usually when we see these either in things such as our papers, like we're going to be writing here, where you state something in a thesis, a claim with reasons to back it up in your thesis, and then you spend an entire paper trying to back that up with research. Or such things as a speech, where somebody's standing up and they're telling you what they would like you to think or believe and trying to persuade you to their point of view. We also have implicit arguments. Implicit arguments might not even look like an argument, but think bumper stickers, advertising, political cartoons, slogans on t-shirts. This could be song lyrics. It still promotes a certain point of view, but it might be a very short, simple message, such as this one. I'm the black Jeep of the family. This sort of implies a couple different arguments. One, that it's cool to have the black Jeep because that's a little bit of the rebel, right? It's the outsider. But also that idea that you're an outsider in other ways as well, which you may or may not particularly buy into. If Jeeps aren't particularly rare, so it might not actually make you an outsider to have a black Jeep. Okay, so in those 5 categories that I was speaking of, the first one we're going to talk about is definitional arguments. And what I want to do today is to quickly take you through some pretty clear examples of what make up different examples that are within these categories, and then we're going to brainstorm some together. So definitional arguments are when you're asking what category does this thing belong to. So you're going to have to do research on how the terms are defined or propose a new or extended definition to something. So for instance, is sleep deprivation torture? We're going to have to define torture and then decide if sleep deprivation fits that definition. Is an expert video game player an athlete? Well, what makes up an athlete? Do video game players share those same traits? Is graffiti art or vandalism? So in this case, you might have to define both art and vandalism, and then define graffiti and decide how it fits into one of those categories. Are sports utility vehicles environmentally unfriendly? Now for this, you'd have to research what it is that makes a vehicle environmentally unfriendly and whether or not those vehicles fit into that. So our second category of argument is causal arguments. These can be anything that are cause and effect. What are the causes of something, or what are the consequences of something happening? So for an example, what are the causes of autism? Or what are the causes of the declining audience numbers for TV news? What might be the consequences of requiring a national ID card? So, in essence, it really asks you to try to figure out either what caused something or what the effects are going to be, effects or consequences. Our third category is resemblance arguments. To what extent are two things similar or different? For example, is the opposition to gay marriage similar to the opposition to interracial marriage? Is steroid use to improve strength similar to LASIK surgery to improve vision? Or, does women's obsessive dieting in America serve the same harmful function as foot binding in ancient China? In any of these three examples, you're comparing two different things to see if it makes sense to put them in the same category, but also to end up having the same outlook on one as you would the other. Our fourth category is evaluation and ethical arguments. What is the worth or value of something? So an example of this is behavior modification a good therapy for anxiety? Does it actually work well? Is it ethical to use steroids in sports? Should we legalize assisted suicide for the terminally ill? Now that last one can be both an ethical evaluation, but also a proposal argument, which will be the next one we get to. But when you start to asking, if you're evaluating whether or not it's morally correct to legalize assisted suicide, that's going to be an evaluation. When you start asking the question, should, you make it into a proposal. Should this be moved into legislation or laws or things like that? Which brings us to our final category, proposal arguments. What action should we take? So that last one was a good example of this. And you can usually see those when you say anywhere in your original research question, if you're asking if we should do something, if we should take some sort of action, then it's going to be a proposal argument. So the last one was a good example. Should assisted suicide be made legal? A couple more examples here. Should the United States enact a single-payer healthcare system? Or finally, to solve the problem of prison overcrowding, should we decriminalize possession of drugs? Any of these three are asking us to evaluate what sort of action should be taken, and then your reasons within that are going to state why you think that action should be taken. So let's look at some examples and decide what they are. We'll decide these as a class. But what type of arguments are these? Should overnight camping be permitted in state parks? Okay, well, if we're evaluating whether or not we should take the action of making it permissible, then we've ended up with a proposal argument. Is taking Adderall in increased concentration for... Oh, there's a typo in that one. I apologize. Is taking Adderall to increase concentration for an exam a form of cheating? What do you think? It's definitional. We're going to have to define cheating and then decide whether or not the advantages of taking Adderall fit into that category of cheating. Will an increase in gas taxes lead to the reduction in road congestion? Yes, causal. We're going to see how these two things are related to each other. Is depression a learned behavior? Yes, definitional. Because again, we're deciding, defining what a learned behavior is, and then deciding whether or not depression fits into that category. Were the terrorist attacks of 9/11 more like Pearl Harbor, an act of war, or like an earthquake, a natural disaster? This is a resemblance argument, where we've set up two different scenarios and compare 9/11 to these two different things that have happened, and whether it's more like one or more like another. So, How effective is acupuncture in reducing morning sickness? This one would be an evaluation. When you see this word effective or how effective, it automatically indicates that we're evaluating this action. On the other hand, if we move on to the next one, is acupuncture quackery or real medicine? We get a very different sort of argument, because then we're trying to figure out what category it fits into. Should cities use tax dollars to fund professional sports arenas? Yep. Proposal. Again, anytime you see this should, it's almost an indication to you that it's going to be a proposal. What kind of action are we going to take based on the information that we're going to be given here? Are Mattel toy factories sweatshops? Definitional. Defining sweatshops and defining whether or not these toy factories fit into that definition. Why are couples who live together before marriage more likely to divorce than couples who don't live together? Causal. We're trying to figure out the cause and effect and why these two things are different. And finally, should the United States build a high-speed light rail system? What are we looking for here? This introduction should. It means that there's some sort of action that we're wondering should be taken. Alright, so for your exercise today, I want you to brainstorm at least one idea for each category of argument. You can do more than one, would be great, but at least one in each category of argument that you might want to consider writing for your paper.